what I'll begin with is at a party not too long ago in Devizes, I was chatting to a gentleman, and yeah, he was quite engaged. And then I was quite surprised when he asked me what island I was from. So I responded and said, this one. And that made him feel quite uncomfortable. And to be honest with you, I'm not sorry about that. And it is a question that comes up from time to time, you know, where are you from really? So let me tell you where I'm from. I'm from these two. This is mother and father. They arrived in England from Jamaica in the 50s. In the wake of the Windrush arrivals. They weren't Windrush arrivals, but you know, immigration sort of took off from there. They were invited. And I arrived in 1959 in the good old British colony of Birmingham. So, son of Radcliffe Blackmore and Muriel Louisa Blackmore, formerly Worthing. And I got my height genes from my mum, as you can see, not my dad. Now, life for me started in rented accommodation, which at that time in the 50s, not unusual for black families. And this also was not unusual for black families. The 1960s welcome sign. So my father, sick of seeing signs like that, took the decision. He saved very hard and saved up the money to buy put down a deposit on a house, and we moved to part of Birmingham called Sullyoak. I know some of you are familiar with Birmingham. Back in those days, Sullyoak was a solid sort of working class, owner-occupied part of Birmingham. Quite different to today. Today it's well, back then, solid white working class. Today it's much more diverse. It's actually full of student accommodation when I last passed through it. So yeah, we were the first people of colour in that neighbourhood. Over the years, this is the part of Birmingham that we and I live subsequently, the southwest corner of Birmingham, which I'd like to call my territory. And yeah, Dad basically was determined we were not going to live in a ghetto. And you know, he made that move. It was quite a brave move, but he's quite a personable guy, and we settled in fairly comfortably. So that led on to me being the first person of colour in my school. This was taken, I was about 7 years old. There are other people of colour in there, but let me say, I'll assure you, I was the first, okay? I was there before then. Now, the sign that I showed you, I saw those signs. In fact, it's more common to see no coloured. That was the most common sign, and I remember those. Now, aside from that, I don't really remember in my very early years. I must have encountered it, but I don't remember racist incidents. But the one that really, my first real close encounter with it was this. One of these sweet little boys in the class, you know, we'd all pretty, you know, we got on well. And at the age of 9, this young lad came into school. I still remember his face to this day. He's thrust his face into mine, veins almost throbbing on his neck. And he gave me some information. Basically, he said to me, "Hi, Dad," says, "you're a black enamel wog." It was straight from the, you know, straight from his dad, straight to me. And yeah, I've always been grateful to Mr. Williams of Selly Oak for passing that on to his son, as you can imagine. And yeah, I was 9 years old. So, you know, at the time, we're talking about the time that Enoch Powell was making his Rivers of Rivers of Blood speeches. So that's the kind of environment, you know, and that's probably what encouraged that. So, you know, lesson number one for me, I think, comes from Nelson Mandela. No one is born hating another because of the colour of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. You know, prior to then, Neil Williams didn't hate me. From then on, yeah, we didn't have the greatest relationships. He spread that to his friends. So, you know, what was a really kind of nice experience at primary school was soured towards the end. That's the way it was. Now, I think what makes this story, for me, even more poignant is 25 years later, my eldest son experienced something similar at school. And we were living in Weston-super-Mare by this time. And Carl attended the local primary school, got on very well. And we were called in by the teacher one day who said that she'd been aware there'd been Carl had been experiencing some racial abuse. And she dealt with it really well. She talked to the lad. She asked the lad's parents to attend the school for a meeting. She spoke to his father, and she was aghast when the father responded that he couldn't actually see anything wrong with the son's behaviour. So we're talking, say, 25 years later, my son going through the same thing. And again, learned behaviour. And I think the teacher was more shocked than we were, but she did look after him. He was one of her favourites. So yeah, the message, it's learned behaviour. Now, just to kind of set this into context. Yeah, this is Birmingham. This was the 60s going into the 70s. But, you know, there was worse. There was worse than that. Birmingham church bombing. This is a different Birmingham. This is Birmingham, Alabama. So this happened. They were bombing at church in Birmingham. This is in retaliation for the easing of segregation laws. And 4 members of the Ku Klux Klan took exception to that, planted dynamite, caused an explosion, killing 4 little girls. So this was in '63, so it was around the time I was starting school. So, you know, it could have been worse, it could have been a lot worse. My dad could have chosen a different Birmingham. And I think the other the worst, well, there's just so many awful things about this, but another one of them being that there were, of those 4 suspects, one of them was convicted in 1977, and the final 2 in 2002, so nearly 40 years later. One of them died before being convicted. And that was a lot of that was down to J. Edgar Hoover blocking investigations. So, you know, that's another Birmingham. Okay, so talk to you about my family. This is my family. Well, these are selections of my family, should we say. So it's my grandfather, Vincent. The guy on the right here is my father. And the guy next to him, now you probably can't see so clearly on your on the picture, may not be coming over so clearly, but this is my uncle Louis, is my dad's half brother. So after bringing up a family, or should we say part bringing up a family in Jamaica, my grandfather resettled in Scotland, married a Caucasian lady, and that gave rise to Louis. And these guys were as like as peas in a pod, even though they were half brothers. This is myself and my sister. I've got 2 other siblings. I've put my sister here for a reason. So my sons, and Carl and Craig, and my sister and her son, James. This is James's son, John, who, as you can see, is fair-haired and blue-eyed. So, you know, is this a black family or what? That's one question, and you know, a rhetorical question. And my answer to that is, well, who cares, frankly? You know, and my full name, Ivor Blackmore. Okay, and that used to attract attention. So, you know, if I go for a job interview, this was not who they expected to answer to the name Ivor Blackmore. You know, it was probably somebody looking more like John, but it was me. So, you know, what's in your name? What's in your name? And people would say, I didn't realise you were black. They would actually say that. And yeah, that just came with the territory. It doesn't get said now and so blatantly, but it was said. What I would say as well is this actually cuts both ways. And I will, you know, this is not a one-way thing. This is not race perception or behaviours coming from people of colour in the opposite direction. I really am uncomfortable with saying white people. I'm going to have to say it because you'll know what I'm talking about. But Debbie, my wife, knows I'm uncomfortable with it. And I always refer to most of you guys out there as Caucasian. It just seems more polite to me. But we'll go with white most of the time for simplicity. Now, I can remember the first time I met family of my father's cousin. My father's cousin also settled in Scotland, as did my grandfather. And he brought up a family in Scotland. He married a local girl. I can remember when the family came to visit, we were about 10 years old. And these 3 kids turned up with Scottish accents. I'd never heard a Scottish accent coming out of the mouths of somebody of colour before. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And the irony is they thought we were really cool. As you know, they'd not seen people of colour speaking with Birmingham accents. So that's again one of those perceptions. You know, that accent doesn't go with that body, does it? Anyway, I talked about my father. What I'd say is that my dad talked a lot, hell of a lot. I'm fairly quiet, so you'd probably find that hard to credit. Now, one thing he impressed upon me when I was growing up was basically his mantra was, you've got to be twice as good as everyone else to prove you're good enough. And I actually thought he'd invented that. I just thought he'd made that up. But actually, I've realised that this is quite common in black communities. And I really had no idea. So there's actually a quote I've picked up from Michelle Obama. And this related, she gave an address at Tuskegee University 2015. And this was a university that trained 1,000 black pilots during the Second World War. And she mentioned they faced all kinds of obstacles, were presumed to be inferior, often assigned to menial tasks, suffered verbal abuse at the hands of their instructors. They finally deployed overseas. White soldiers often wouldn't even return their salutes. So instead of being defined by the discrimination and the doubts of those around them, they went on to show the world that if black folks and white folks could fight together, fly together, and surely they could eat at a lunch counter together. And their kids could go to school together. So again, those guys that was a phenomenal unit. They ended up with lowest loss records of all escorter fighter groups. Services were in constant demand. And so this was another kind of demonstration to me that, I guess, as the race community, we just feel that we almost have to overprove ourselves. And a lot of my friends, a number of my friends have talked about facing discrimination when applying for jobs. Don't forget, we were leaving school in the 70s and 80s. And I've been very lucky. I've only experienced that once. And what happened to me was I went for what essentially was a holiday job. And I answered a newspaper advert, and I was told to be at the location 2 hours later. So I made an appointment to be there 2 hours later. And I got there, and I actually did not make it past the receptionist. She just told me the job had gone. And, there's no way that happened. There's no way that somebody was already being considered or got in between times or been offered the job. And I could tell there was no way. Problem was, I was only 17. I wasn't really equipped to respond to that. I knew it was going on, but I just couldn't. Now, since then, I've been pretty lucky in work. I'd never been out of work, and I grew up during the Thatcher era. I worked through the 70s and 80s despite Thatcher. So pretty lucky. I've also I've a couple of times failed a job interview in the sense that I didn't get the job, but on both occasions I got revenge. So in the first instance, another post came up, same organisation. They explained to me second time round that on the first occasion I was just too immature, and to be honest, they were right. The second time was actually gave me a bit of comfort. Was not so many years ago, actually, before I went freelancing. I've been freelancing for getting on for 10 years, and before I went freelancing, I worked in consultancy, and I went for a job. I was interviewed, and obviously, it wasn't what they were looking for. The quote back to me was they were looking for a hairy-ass project manager, and obviously my ass wasn't hairy enough. And funnily enough, what happened was I ended up working with a team from that company on a project a couple of years later. And then I got a call from that company saying, "We've heard about your stuff, we've heard about what you do, would you like to join us?" So I took great pleasure in turning them down. So, what comes around and all that. So, I think I've been pretty lucky in the workplace. I think other people have, from evidence I've heard, have suffered quite a lot. But one area where it didn't work out so well was actually, I suppose, in the wider world, I'd say that I've experienced racial abuse in countless situations. And I think probably the worst environment was at football matches in the 70s and 80s. It was not, if you were black, it was not a good time to be at football, but I was crazy about football. I went. So we persevered as fans. So, there's a lot of publicity about the players putting up with that abuse during that time, but actually the fans put up with an awful loss. We were surrounded by it. Fortunately, things got better and not perfect, but by the 90s, it was, I suppose, sufficiently less unpleasant for me to take my sons to matches. But there's one occasion I can remember, because I played football as well. And back in my 20s, I played against the side. We played earlier in the season. I'd done quite well. They clearly marked me out as somebody to watch, and they put a guy who just followed me around the pitch the whole time. That was okay. I could live with that. But then he was gesturing behind the ref's back. He was calling me names. He just completely wound me up. And I have to say, I'm not proud. I absolutely clattered the guy at some point in the match, and I was sent off for it. And the lesson that taught me, especially looking back, is that, you know, there were other incidents, but that was the worst. But, you know, we had professionals, black professionals, who put up with that week in, week out. You know, the strength of those guys, I couldn't take it. And the strength of those guys was just, I think it was just awesome. And sadly, they're still putting up with it today, more on a verbal level than a physical level, but it's still going on, sadly. Now, here's a quiz for you. You should know the answer to this because I've kind of given you half the answer already. So, yeah, spot the immigrant. So the immigrant in that picture is actually the lady on the left who is Canadian. She was not born here. So, you know, when we talk about being overrun by immigrants, this is the kind of person you have to look out for. My wife. Okay, not me. So, that's an amusing aside, really. Let me tell you a bit about my reality then. So, as I've said, you know, put up with racism over the years. Giving you some highlights, I guess, but it's this kind of more regular, or you know, this experience that is more there on a fixed basis. So this sort of thing has happened in the past, still goes on. So, you know, being followed or watched closely in shops. Now I'll give you a specific example here. We've been living in Devizes for a couple of years, and I went into the local Sainsbury's, did my shopping, and I was followed around by a security guard. And it was actually the third visit when he was doing this that I finally reacted. And I approached him and asked him, you know, why he thought that he should be following me around. And he explained to me that I looked suspicious. So, you know, there's your crime, shopping while black. Anyway, I just took it further. I asked to see the manager. I told the manager what had happened. And guess what? It didn't happen again. So, you know, I had to address it. And as I say, this is not unique. It still goes on today. I've lived with it, yeah, pretty much all my adult life, to be honest. Well, all my life. Here's another one. So I'll be walking down the road, and to be honest, if you're, rather than walk past you, I will cross the road, because you know one of the things that really gets to you is when you'll pass. Sorry, generally women that carry handbags, but a woman will clutch your bag closely, you know, hold on to it closely, for fear that you're going to attack her. Now, you know, I think anybody's capable of that, and you're all right. It's not going to be me. So yeah, that's part of the daily reality. Yeah, a number of times somebody has said, thought you were being served, didn't know it was your turn. Best of all, didn't see you there. Hello. You know, you can't miss me in a country pub. You really can't. And you know, I'll walk out of pubs like that, frankly. They're not getting my business. And it's great. It kind of, what warms your heart is when there's a white guy next to you, clearly knows what's happening, and he says, no, he was next. You know, and that restores your faith, that kind of thing. Because people know when this is happening. And, you know, they should address it. Again, just to emphasize, it's not one way. That happens to be in Jamaica as well. So, you know, it's not just a white thing. It is a black thing as well. We've got next. Oh, yes. So Debbie and I will eat at a restaurant, and look, put the bill down between us and we'll sort it out. Don't assume that she's going to pay it. And this happens time after time after time. It's not a coincidence. It just happened. You know, it happens on a regular basis. And they don't get tipped, basically. And yeah, being underestimated, being undermined, underestimated. So that's the, you know, you've got to try, you've got to be twice as good. I'll be honest with you. I'm a freelance IT consultant, and I'll brag. I'm good at what I do. I am good at what I do, but it's not because I'm particularly talented. It's because I work hard. Okay. Often people say, "Oh, it was a great idea. Well, that's a great thing you did," and I think it was Einstein. You know, 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration, that kind of thing. That's all it's down to. It's just working hard, so I don't get underestimated. Now, I'll give you an example of being undermined. Doing a quiz like recently, I've done a lot of quizzes. I run quizzes for the party. I run them for Mensa. I'm a member of Mensa. And there was a question asked. And the question was, the Wiltshire resident claims to have descended from two named historic figures. And in a throwaway line, the questioner said, and it's not you, Ivor. I was preoccupied because I was helping to run the thing. And this comment actually passed me by until Debbie appeared at my side. She had been in another room doing the quiz, and she logged off at that point. She just left the meeting. She came up, she gave me a note, told me what happened. It's basically the figures in question were white, and I couldn't possibly be descended from them. So, as we saw from the picture there, that's bloody nonsense anyway. And it was unnecessary. It was completely unnecessary. And the worst thing from Debbie's perspective was nobody on the call called him out. And somebody should have called him out. Arguably, I should have, but as I say, I was preoccupied. I was busy. I was doing stuff. I was the production team, if you like, but nobody called him out. And it was obvious, again, quoting Debbie, it was obvious that people had heard, people had understood, because they were shifting. They looked uncomfortable. They looked uncomfortable. Debbie was livid. And yeah, 2020 shouldn't be happening. So, yeah, I mean, imagine those things happening to you just because you had black hair rather than black skin. Okay. Oh yeah, bit of light relief again. In the early 90s, I changed career. I previously worked in local government, and that's when I went into consultancy. And one of my first assignments was running some training workshops in a local authority in North Wales. And all the logistics had been arranged in terms of getting the materials, because it was all printed in those days, sorting out the location, all the usual stuff. And then all that had left to do was to talk to the guy, my opposite number there, and just make the final arrangements and, you know, dot the I's, cross the T's. And John Jones, yes, he was named John Jones. It was North Wales. He said, yeah, everything's sorted out. We've got you a place to stay. And this was the place. So I'm not sure whether you can make this out clearly, but yeah, they put me up at the Black Boy Inn. So that's the, if he'd known I was black, I suspect he would not have put me up there. Again, Ivor Blackmore, going to North Wales. You know, who are you expecting? Probably not a black guy. Anyway, I can recommend the Stables Hotel in Llanberis, which was where I stayed later on subsequent visits. Llanberis, probably, dial correct me. Anyway, everything went well. It all worked out. The work went well. I got more work there as well, and I was able to see the funny side of it. And I realised that this is not the only Black Boy Inn in Britain. I know there are more of them around. More's the pity. So, what's changed? So, say during the 90s, the noughties, things got better. Again, never perfect. We've got new generations, more tolerant than their elders. Society becoming more tolerant, you know, multicultural. And yeah, the but is a relative term. It did get better. And then you know what? Along came Brexit. And I have to tell you, that changed things. You know, I woke up like the rest of you, listening to Nigel Farage's mates talking about having their country back. And, you know, they would claim in polite circles that means getting sovereignty back, as if it was ever lost, and whatever that is. And, you know, they weren't afraid, they weren't embarrassed or shamed, and they were quite happy for people to interpret that as, we're going to get rid of immigrants. And, you know, stopping immigration was the big feature of all that, as we know. So, to be honest, walking through Devizes the day after, literally the day after, 24th of June, it was like a throwback to me. It was a bit like the 60s. You know, it's just, I'm always aware of my colour, and there are times like that when I'm even more aware of it. You know, it's obviously a Brexit voting area. And it just reminded me of that time back in the late 60s. And I suppose the difference, or a new dimension to all this now, is you don't get quite so much face-to-face. You know, people have got social media to hide behind. And that's where a lot of this takes place. So I'll give you an example. You've probably seen loads of examples yourself, but I mentioned I'm in Mensa, and there are debates going on. Mensa has its own Facebook group. And there was a debate about Black Lives Matter, and the context of it was some chap had been sarcastically said that, oh, I don't remember the protests following the Rwandan massacres. And, you know, and the thread just developed. And I don't monitor this group at all, but occasionally I'll look at posts, and I saw this one. So there's a discussion about criminality, and somebody has said, well, you know, do you know what it's like to get stopped on a regular basis? And I've got to be honest, I'm not going to make up stories. I've been stopped by the police twice. I think only on one occasion it was because I was driving a sports car. So, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say, I I've found this to be endemic, but you know, I do hear that it happens. There's been quite a lot of stories about it. I know it happens on a regular basis in the States. Anyway, one member took it upon himself to say, yeah, he didn't get stopped. The reason I don't get stopped is because I don't break the law, whereas 3 out of 4 black people are criminals. Again, written by a member of Mensa in 2020. Obviously, I responded to that. The problem is when you get into that, and what happened was I was in a rabbit warren for the whole bloody afternoon instead of doing what I needed to do, responding to idiots like that. In fact, this guy, funny enough, there was a later debate, and so it's not a habit I make. I don't make a habit of going into these things, but there was a subsequent debate. And this guy sided with me in that debate. So, in some way, I think I might have had an impression upon him. But I just, you know, I responded and said, "You've never met me. How can you say that there's a 3 in 4 chance that I'm a criminal? That's just ridiculous. And you'd expect better." One other one for you. I play golf. I'm a member of a golf club. And this is probably, I don't know how well you'll see this, but I'm going to quote selections. In fact, I'm going to read the whole lot. So some guy thought it was acceptable to forward this post into a WhatsApp group. So I just want to stress this is not an official group of the club. It's a private group of guys who compete together. And I'd only just joined this group. I hadn't been in it long at all. And yeah, somebody thought it was appropriate to forward this message into the group. So a thought-provoking passage written by an Englishman about the current situation in his homeland. This is thought-provoking, equally relevant in any other once white country. So apparently it's a white country. So he talks about, you know, us calling ourselves British Africans, Chinese, etc. And then they're just British, you know what I mean? Plain old English people that were born here. Obviously, it doesn't include me. If we had White History Month, we'd be racists. In the Bradford riots, Toxteth riots, you believe that you were standing up for your race and rights. If we stood up for our race and rights, you'd call us racists. You're proud to be black, etc. Not afraid to announce it. You know, this is just a selection of it, actually. It went on and on. You rob us, you carjack us, rape our daughters. When a white police officer arrests a black gang member or beats up an Asian drug dealer running from the law and posing a threat to society, you call him racist. So again, 2020, somebody thought that appropriate. Now, I left that group straight away. I know at least one other person who did as well. I've got feedback since the various people were pretty disgusted by it. The reason I personally haven't challenged that individual is that I know he has some issues. And I'm not just talking about this as an issue, but I'm serious. He has some personal issues, and it wouldn't be fair. This is not fair, but I really don't want to destroy somebody. But I shall make my points at the appropriate time. So, for example, if I got drawn against this person in a competition, I wouldn't play him, and I'd tell him exactly why as well. So these things have a habit of coming around. And I did get an apology from the group administrator, and I think, sorry, I honestly believe it was sincere, but I also believe he was covering his backside in case there were repercussions. But I wasn't gonna take it through official channels or anything like that. And again, just to balance things up, you know, people of colour can be racist as well. So this is sort of funny, but you know, I think it bears sharing. Trip to Jamaica 10 years ago. We've been a few times. I remember being in a barber shop, and that's really an incredible place for conversation. And the talk, it was quite busy. There was quite a bit of talk about football, and there was a consensus amongst the barbers that they talked about the England football side and said black players are not given a chance. And I wasn't being defensive or anything, but I just, being smart, said, well, Rio Ferdinand is the England captain. And the response I got to that was, he's not really black. He's actually mixed race. And it didn't matter what I said and who I suggested had, been given a fair run. They were never black enough. If they were black, they hadn't been given a fair chance. So it's kind of funny. It's kind of not, but it just sort of balances things up. And yes, the point about that is we've got arseholes in every community. I think those guys were being funny to an extent, but it wasn't completely funny. Right, I'm kind of coming towards the end, but something else I want to share with you. Again, the what's changed. Yeah. Okay, let me put that up. I don't know if any of you were aware of this story about Liam Neeson. Learning that a family member had been raped. And he said, my immediate reaction was, did she know who it was? No. What colour were they? She said it was a black person. So he said that for weeks afterwards, he walked the streets hoping to meet somebody of colour so he could kill him, he said. So I think that got quite a bit of publicity. Obviously, that there's not enough levels on which to explain how wrong that is. Now, what I'd say is that this next bit, I'm gonna say it. It's very difficult to find the right words, but I'll tell you what this evokes in me. I'm a news junkie. I listen to the news all the time. Radio 4 addicts, local news as well. Now, there's something about when crimes are reported, particularly serious crimes, and I listen out for the description of who committed that crime. And, I kind of hold my breath and it just feels wrong, but it happens. I just hope that perpetrator wasn't a person of colour. That's wrong because you should be thinking about the victim. But every report that involves a person of colour, to me, it's just another, it's another puncture, really. So it's not the same thing there, but it kind of evokes that that experience for me. I hope that didn't come out wrong. That and that's quite happy to debate that in a few minutes. But honestly, it's there. So, what can you guys do? Well, you guys can stop this. Okay. Stop following me around in shops. The guy concerned, I had in terms of credit and debit cards in my wallet, I could have spent about 4 times his annual salary. So, the idea that I was going to nick a bag of sweets is just ridiculous. And I told him that as well. Yeah, anybody could mug anybody. 61-year-old guy. I lied about the 60, by the way. I'm 61. He's not going to do that, and nor are most of us. Most of us are law-abiding. So yeah, just stop that. Challenge racist behaviours. I told you about the incident on the quiz. I'm sorry, somebody should have challenged that. And, you know, Debbie will tell you the same. So John Lewis was one of Martin Luther King's lieutenants, if you will, in the fight for civil rights. He died at the weekend, and found a quote that said, if you see something that's not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation to do something about it. So I'd say do something about it. Do some research. Now I flashed up some names at the beginning, quite happy to revisit those. The Rennie wrote a book, was written a book, and it's called Why I've Stopped Talking to White People About Race. I've heard her talk about that book and about how the title came back. It wasn't her idea originally, but it's the original title was a bit lame, but the title actually described exactly what she's written about. So the title was added after she'd written it. While I remember it, do some research, yeah. Okay, so you've been recorded, I don't care, I'm going to say it. Ignore Trevor Phillips. Trevor Phillips, I think, is still head of the campaign for racial equality. He's lost the plot. These guys totally lost the plot. So the other three, and there are more. There's just lots of stuff out there. Please do some research. Actually, I've got Robert's raised his hand, so I'm just going to unmute before I get to the end of this. Robert, can you unmute yourself? For some reason, I can't unmute you. Robert's our BAME officer.
Hi, Trev.
Go for it, Robert.
Sorry, it was a mistake. Sorry, I didn't. Sorry, Ivor, it was a mistake. I just wanted to comment on your Trevor Phillips statement, just to say, right on. That's correct. I agree with that.
You agree?
Yeah, it's not somebody to be listened to at all.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, Trevor Phillips in his day was, I thought, a really good guy, really impressive guy, but yeah, he has unfortunately lost the plot in my book. It's great, educate your children, grandchildren, etc. You know, that quote, no one's born hating another person because of the colour of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. If they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Those are just some of the things you can do if you want to get on board with this. And as I've said, I do hear from time to time, we heard enough about this, so they're still banging on about this. And I just ask, what's the alternative? You stop talking about it and, you know, it just disappears. It's a tough call, but on balance, I'll say we need to keep talking about it. And I'm happy to help in that regard. Always happy to talk about it. And it's been quite an interesting exercise putting this together. And I thank you for your time and your patience.